Hello, everyone. I'm Gene Quinn. Thank you for joining us for this segment today. I'm happy to bring to you András Jókúti, and András is the director of the Patent and Technology Law Division at the World Intellectual Property Organization, and we're very happy to have him here for this chat here today. András is the former Director General of Legal Affairs at the Hungarian Intellectual Property Office, and he is new, relatively new at least, in his position at WIPO. So we're going to ask him a little bit about himself to introduce himself to the world community. And we're going to also ask him what he's doing at WIPO and what his plans are for the division that he is running. So, Andres, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Gene, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great.
I am András. Go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
I was just going to ask you to, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into IP, and then maybe how you wound up at WIPO.
All right. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I'm a lawyer. I do not have a scientific background, but only a legal background. But I spent approximately 15 years in the Hungarian public administration, 10 years out of which at the Hungarian IP office in various leadership positions. I was dealing with all forms of IP, from trademarks through designs to patents. I was involved in the long negotiations relating to the unitary patent title and the unified patent court in the European Union. And I was also representing the Hungarian office as a delegate at various international fora, including the standing committees of WIPO. So I was a little bit familiar with the workings of WIPO before joining. In 2014 and 15, I was so fortunate that I could study in the US, actually in DC at GW, the George Washington University Law School, as a Fulbright scholar, and I obtained an LLM in intellectual property there. So this way, I could get exposure after some work experience in the European system. I could get some exposure of the US IP system as well, and of course, I was also listening to courses on international IP. So the international
Yeah.
framework was familiar to me at that point as well. After I left the Hungarian IP office in 2019, I spent 2.5, almost 3 years at the Budapest University of Technology and Economics, where I was assisting the institution in building up or rebuilding its technology transfer operations.
hmm Oh, good. So you have a technology transfer background. I
Yeah,
think I think that that's very critical. And a lot of times I think that that's lacking. Maybe not so much in the people who are in the administration of IP, meaning in the world patent offices, but certainly in judges. And not to say anything bad about judges, but that they get on the bench and they have life tenure, and I think sometimes they get a little bit too divorced from what people actually really do with IP, you know?
yeah, actually, that's very true. So I'm thinking that me joining WIPO at this point is much better than joining WIPO 3 years ago
Mhm.
when I was just working at the Hungarian office. Being in public policy for a long time gives you very valuable insights, but it also distances you a little bit from real life operations of how IP works. And just moving to the university and encountering how researchers are thinking, how
Mhm.
companies are thinking, who are liaising with the university, and how these negotiations are going about, and how you actually build a system within the institution to manage IP in a proper way. That gave me a huge chunk of new information that I was not even in possession before. So I think right now my background is it's far from complete, but at least it has more segments than only one.
Yeah, I think you're being a little too modest. I mean, because I think the technology, for me personally, and everybody who knows me knows I really feel this way. Because I'm a big fan of the Autumn organization here, largely in the U.S., although they have members from all over the world, which is the Association of University Technology Managers. And I did a little bit of work with folks like that when I was at Syracuse University. that really is the hub of what it is that we all do, right? Because you can work with researchers, you can work with the business people, you work with startups, and you have all the problems
Exactly.
of startups. Like, how do they pay the electric bill? How do they find the inventions to pursue, and when do they stop pursuing them and change course?
Yeah,
How
you
do they
have to
find
be
investors?
you have to be a little bit of everything there.
Right.
And what is even more important, and that is also having a growing importance in WIPO, is how to communicate in a very comprehensible way on or about the role of IP, and about the role of IP not only in the lives of big companies, but also in the lives of startups, individual inventors, designers, and all the people who are there in the ecosystem of a university. Not only the researchers, but also the students.
hmm So during this program, we're going to be talking to a number of people from the European Patent Office, and I've become a very big fan of their outreach program over the years. And before the pandemic, they were doing a lot of programs for SMEs, to explain the rights to them and really understand them, and have workshops that would really dive deep, and really become a big fan of what is going on in Europe, and always been very impressed by WIPO and just the commitment to being really what I've always referred to as apostles of intellectual property. I
Mm.
mean, if you want to know why and how intellectual property works and why it matters, just listen to WIPO as they travel the world and try and explain this to country after country.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, of course, joining in January, I cannot take credit for a lot what WIPO has been doing, but from the recipient side, I also saw what they are doing, and even for the university, we were organizing events where WIPO colleagues were explaining, the basics and the importance of IP to students and researchers alike. So indeed, that is really important, and I'm finding more and more that WIPO really is sitting on a huge pile of information. You cannot name anything related to IP that WIPO does not have a study or some kind of
hmm
research or reference document on, which means that if you are looking for a cornucopia of information on IP, you should go to WIPO, and basically on WIPO's website you can find everything. But it is also a challenge because if there is a lot of information, then
Yes.
you have to structure it in a way that is actually accessible to the general public and to specific target audiences. And that is where WIPO is actually having a lot of new projects, and we are working towards making the work products of WIPO much more visible and much more accessible.
That's great because what I do find what you say. If you have a question to anything dealing with international intellectual property, WIPO is really the place to go to get start through your research and get some very good answers, and that are reliable. It's a great resource. So why don't we pivot a little bit? Although you may have just given us a little bit of a preview there, but what is it that the division, the patent law division, is doing right now? And
Right.
and let's say where do you? And I'd like to also ask you and make sure we have some time to talk about where it is that you would like to take the division under your
Mhm.
leadership.
Okay. So the Patent and Technology Law Division is having actually two sections which are doing interrelated but quite different activities. So one is the legislative and the policy advice section, which is dealing with requesting member states of the WIPO. I mean, member states of the WIPO which are requesting legislative or policy advice in order to upgrade their patent systems or create their patent systems for that matter. So this means that we are engaging with member state authorities who are approaching WIPO. We are trying to gauge and fathom, their interests, their needs, and what they are desiring to do with their patent systems. And then we are doing our best to give them the advice that they require. This can range from actually drafting patent laws for them or patent regulations, or not only just patents, because we are called the Patent and Technology Law Division. So it can also be utility models, it can also be
hmm
trade secrets,
hmm
it can also be any form of IP, which is somehow related to technological innovation. So through drafting manuals or just commenting on some envisaged amendment that they might have on their patent legislation, and then we are engaging in a conversation, we are engaging in a discussion with them, and giving them recommendations. Of course, WIPO is not in the position to tell member states what to do or what not to do, and we are also not adjudicating on the compliance of any member state provision with any of the international treaties, but we do give our opinions
Hmm.
and we do give our advice on it, and we are also taking into account the socio-economical realities of the given country. So the legislative advice that we are giving is tailor-made, it's customized. That is the key. So we are not pursuing a one-size-fits-all approach, but we are engaging in meaningful and sometimes long-winding conversations with member state authorities.
So,
Of
so let
course,
me can I
go
ask you
ahead.
something about that there? So,
Sure.
when you say customized advice, so like you will take work with, say, for example, a delegation from, I won't name any particular country, but country A, and
Mhm.
you'll get to know them and what's going on in their country, and probably, based on my experience, having been sitting around some of these tables as an outside expert that has been asked to come in to just be there in case there's questions. You'll kind of get to know the legislative process and what the legislators are, what their preferences are, and what they're willing to do and they're not willing to do, and you take all that into consideration. Then you make a recommendation. That's really what
Yeah,
you're talking
exactly.
about here, right?
Exactly, exactly. And
Now,
what
can we
I'm
go a little
striving
bit
to do.
deeper into that? Because I don't think I mean I know how that works because I've been sitting, not often, but a couple. Sometimes I get invited to be, in those situations. There's delegations come in and people are having these conversations, and occasionally they'll have an outside expert because an issue might come up or there might be a question about this and that sort of thing. So, um, so I know how those conversations go and I know how it works. But can you kind of lay out a little bit of the inside baseball? Not anything confidential, but just like the process and procedure. How does that conversation get engaged? How does it get set up? How does it work?
Well, usually the request is coming through the regional and national development sector of WIPO, where every country, every region, and every country has a person in charge. So when it comes through formal channels, it comes through them, and it starts with an initial conversation of the authorities, and making sure that we understand what their needs are. It's not always clear in the beginning because sometimes it's a very high level request saying that we would need WIPO's assistance in this and that, and then of course we have to get down to the technical level, sit down with them. Of course now it's mostly online. Sit
Mhm.
down with them and understand what type of legislation or what level of legislation they are willing to tackle. Maybe it's not even only the patent and technology law division that is concerned, but also the copyright division or the brands and design sector relating to trademarks or designs, or even other sectors of WIPO dealing with competition law, frontier technologies. It can be a lot of things, or enforcement for that matter. And then we all have to work together and identify what the needs are, and then engage in an iterative process of gauging their needs, of getting an overview of what type of or what kind of a patent system they would like to have, and then provide them with a draft. Now, as you know, I'm only here since January, which
Right.
is like 1.5 months ago. So I'm not saying that I followed through, a project from the
Mhm.
beginning till the end, because this usually takes several months, if not years. But what I'm striving to do, and this is, something of a strategic goal for the division, is to build up a stable methodology of doing this, and to be able to provide the various options that they can have in their legislation, with due explanation of the repercussions of choosing one option or the other, and then having those conversations. Now,
Mhm.
I'm convinced that once it's possible to travel again, like week-long workshops are actually working much better than
Yeah.
1 hour online conversations with the authorities, because that's usually not the most meaningful of it all. Right now, we have to do a lot of things in writing, back and forth,
Mhm.
email communications, but just being there and understanding where they are coming from, where they are actually in that moment, helps a lot in giving meaningful
Yeah,
advice.
this is fascinating because there's a limit to what people are going to say in writing. And and as great as Zoom is, or any other platform that you might use to connect, and it is wonderful. It's kept people in touch and really sane over the last 2 years.
Right.
um it doesn't These kind of conversations, you need to develop trust and familiarity, and get to know people, and they open up, and that that just doesn't happen easily or over
Exactly.
Zoom, you know.
Yeah.
And that, I was glad you said what you said, because I was going to ask you, how long does it take for these things to unfold? And it can take, sometimes it can go relatively quickly, but it can take years.
Oh yeah, exactly. But
And
it was.
always tell people in the US, because when we in the US are doing legislation, there's people who, like everywhere in the world, pay attention to it from the very beginning. WIPO gets involved sometimes years before it actually is on the floor and getting voted on, right? And there's people who pay attention like that, the lobbyists and the corporations that it really matters to, etc. And then you have a whole bunch of people who then want to parachute in at the last minute and say, "Oh, well,
Yeah.
I don't like this, or I don't like that, and you need to change this, you need to change that." It's like, well, people have been working on this for years already. The time to have your voice heard is not in the last 6 weeks.
Yeah, definitely. But internal consultations with national stakeholders, or business stakeholders, or lobbyists, or whoever they would like to consult, is not a business for WIPO.
Right,
And of
right.
course, WIPO must always stay neutral. So we are not pushing any agenda. We are coming from the technical side of things, which
Yeah,
means
no, and
which
I didn't mean to
doesn't
suggest
mean.
that. What I just meant,
No, I
I
know.
just wanted the audience to realize, like, if WIPO, I mean, because WIPO is the, essentially, in my opinion, the resource for governments, sort of like the first go to. If people are thinking about, hey, we're thinking about doing X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, why don't we check with WIPO, see what they think? I mean, that seems like a logical thing to do, particularly for,
Right.
most of the countries in the world who don't have any particular
Yeah.
expertise or anybody to call or look to.
And of
Um,
course, there are questions where WIPO will say, "Well, we cannot decide for you
right.
what you want." It's sometimes I'm comparing this to, like, ordering a suit. So you go to the tailor
Mhm.
and you say, "Well, I want a suit," and they say, "Okay, so what kind of a suit do you want?" And we see the figure of the person, we see their eye color, their hair color, and we know, okay, so maybe this color would suit you, maybe that cut would suit you, but still they have to decide in the end what they want to wear. And
Right.
first we have to agree on the basic things, on what fabric you want it from,
Right.
and
Right.
then you do something, and then of course some minor adjustments can be made, and the client can decide that they want something different, but you contributed to the process by giving your advice based on your past experience and based on your technical knowledge, of course.
Yeah. No, this is a fascinating conversation. I love having these conversations because it kind of peels back the layer of what goes on behind the scene and really informs people. And that's why I wanted to make sure we hit that, how long it takes from the start, because I want to make sure people who do genuinely want to get involved in the processes and try and make things better and be heard, need to realize that these things start well before, many of you think that they do. So if you are wanting to be engaged, you need to really pay attention to the whole process, because it's a very long process, and it can take a lot of time and energy to get it quote unquote right, because there not is not necessarily a quote unquote right for a
Yeah.
lot of these countries. There's many choices that they can make, because quite frankly they don't have any particular rules that relate to this anyway, and they're
Yeah.
starting fresh, a lot of them, in some
Yeah, and it's
ways.
really really important to pair this up with capacity building, because you can have a patent system on paper that doesn't work if they don't have the necessary expertise locally. So WIPO is also assisting these countries in building their capacities. There are various programs to do that, to create a patent examiner base,
Mhm.
to create trainings for potential patent attorneys or for lawyers who would like to represent clients in a given country. So this is not merely producing paper in terms of legislation, but also producing meaningful capacities in a given economy.
Oh, that's good to know. That's very good. So, what else do you think you're going to be doing, or what else are you doing now that you would like
Yeah,
everyone
this
to
was
know?
this was one of the sections of the division. The other section is the patent and treaties law section. One important activity there is actually administering the Budapest Treaty. I don't know if you are familiar with it, of
Yep.
course,
Yep.
and the patent law treaties. So these are very technical treaties, both patent related. The Budapest Treaty, creates an international recognition system for the deposit of microorganisms for the
Hmm.
purposes of sufficient disclosure in patent applications. And then it's enough for you to only deposit your microorganisms or microorganisms at one international depository authority, and then it is recognized by all the other member states of the Budapest Treaty. And the patent law treaty, of course, is thriving to create a user-friendly system in terms of prosecution of patent applications, and it creates, like a maximum harmonization
Yep.
regime, with the exception of the filing date requirements, where member states have to comply with this and have to convey all those legal provisions that make sure that the least number of applicants are actually losing rights because of
Yeah.
missing deadlines, or they have the necessary relief
Yeah.
measures in place.
I'm laughing because we finally in the U.S. implemented that.
Yeah,
We agreed to the treaty. I forget when it was we agreed to the treaty, and then we kind of didn't do anything about it. And then we did implement it. It's been years. It's been since 2013, I think it was, that we finally
yeah,
implemented it. And there's just, as you say, there's a lot of little things in there that streamline and make the processes very similar. You can't, like, for example, you can't revive an application now for unavoidable abandonment. It's got to be unintentional, and now you can restore priority if you mistakenly miss the date and that sort of thing. And
yeah, exactly. There are a lot of intricacies there, and a lot of things that make the lives of applicants
yeah,
easier.
I
But
think
also,
I think that treaty also allows you to make reference filing too, right? So you can last minute quickly file in order to save a priority date and that sort of thing.
yeah.
So, yeah. So,
So
and
we are
and
also
what do
addressing.
you do with respect to those two treaties? Are you trying to get more members to sign on, or explain that to
Yes,
them? And
that's one of the things, explaining it to countries, explaining both treaties and the benefits of those treaties to the countries, and not only the countries but also the international community. The
Mhm,
more harmonization you have, the more accessible the patent system is for all kinds of players.
mhm,
And if they require assistance, then of course we are ready to help them to get prepared for the implementation of those treaties. Of course, there are also forms and different documents that we are taking care of. We are also providing the secretariat for the meetings of these unions, because all the treaties administered by WIPO are creating these special unions
mhm,
among the membership, and then there are regular meetings for these unions, and those unions also can make decisions, for example, amending the regulations of those treaties. So these are decision-making bodies that also needs the secretarial support. And of course, if member states are requiring WIPO to produce any documents that are needed, for example, for the interpretation or the implementation of these treaties, then we are, of course, happy to do that. There are guidelines, there are documents explaining the intricacies of these legal documents. So administering these treaties, and as you rightfully pointed out, we are trying to expand the membership of these treaties as much as possible.
yeah.
Now, apart from these, the division is also serving as the secretariat for the Standing Committee on the Law of Patents, which is, like an international forum for the development of the international patent system. It takes place, I mean, originally it took place twice per year. Now during the pandemic, it was reduced to once per year in a hybrid format. Now we will see what the future holds. This year it will be also once, and then we will see. It depends on how the member states would like to proceed. uh, this committee is very much member state driven, meaning that member states, and there are a lot of them, have to agree on the work program of the committee and what kinds of topics they are willing to discuss among each others. Now, originally, the standing committee was created to achieve on the long run some kind of a substantive patent law harmonization, but that did not happen because of the divide among the countries. Now it's not on the agenda right now, but we are discussing very pertinent issues that contribute. Just the discussion about it contributes to the development of the international patent system. But notable agenda items are, but many things can be shoved under these chapeaus, but are exceptions and limitations, the quality of patents, including opposition systems, technology transfer measures, client attorney privilege, and whatever member states would like to share as regards the development of their own patent systems. Filing or submitting the amendments in their legislation, and also sharing the details of those with other member states to learn from each other. There are lots of information sessions, sharing sessions, and discussions that are actually very inspiring. Oh
Yeah,
yeah, and
and
of
that's a
course,
big
last
part of your job, really. I mean, you guys are disseminating information and sharing information and discussing. That's why I really refer to WIPO as and not all WIPO, but we'll talk through this a bit. But many of you at WIPO are the apostles of intellectual property, right?
well, that's really flattering to hear. I need to add that there is also a fifth very important agenda item: patents and public health. I mean, I, I,
Yeah.
I shouldn't have forgotten to mention that. I was just speaking too fast, but that's also one of the topics that garners the most attention now, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, no, no, and hopefully that will recede in importance simply because I think we're coming out of this 2 year just I don't even know what to call it. It's like just been tragic in so many
Yeah,
ways, but it's good to. It seems like we're going to be on the other side of this very, very soon.
fingers
Once
crossed.
flu season is over, fingers crossed. I think we're at the point where the virus will be weakened as coronaviruses always do, and then
Yeah,
we're going to just have to live with it. Viruses don't go away. I mean, well, we've eradicated smallpox, and that's only because it didn't have an animal reservoir, and the vaccine was extraordinarily effective, and everybody took it.
yeah,
So it's virtually impossible to eradicate viruses. So we know we're going to have to live with it, and luckily, it keeps getting weaker. So,
yeah,
but at the same time, I think this should be a wake up call that we need to be incentivizing innovation because, if this did have the mortality rate that it appeared in the early days that we were being told, like the nearly 15% mortality rate, like in the first month or so that we were being told that it could have, this would have been a very, very different pandemic.
yeah, indeed.
So I suppose those are the types of conversations WIPO is being involved in, trying to make sure that countries know and continue to not lose sight of the importance of incentive to innovate in the
Yeah, but
medical
member
space.
states are making sure that we do not lose sight of those important things. As I said, it's a principle in member states which are setting the agenda. Of course, they thankfully give a lot of work to WIPO as well to prepare all the documents
Right.
for the meetings. But it is the decision of our members to determine what they want to talk about, and they definitely want to talk about patents and health. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. And then, of course, and you're not really on the PCT side, but WIPO does a lot of PCT and administers the PCT, and the WIPO also does uh, domain name resolution and UDRP, and so WIPO has an awful lot of things going on, and I'm a fan of what WIPO does, like I am a fan of pretty much what all the offices do. I mean, and people call me, like I'm just a fanboy. Maybe I am, because I really am a believer in intellectual property, and those people who also are believers in intellectual property and are out there really trying to make the system better. I just admire. So
Well, we appreciate your support, and I'm very happy to be here to be able to talk about these issues.
Yeah, so I really appreciate your time. I'm looking at the clock. I told you I would only take 30 minutes of your time, and we're approaching 30 minutes here. So what I would
Yeah.
like to do though is I would like to give you an opportunity to wrap up, and maybe two questions. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to tell the audience? Um, and then two, I'll ask you for your final thoughts. But first, what else might you like to tell the audience before you leave today?
But just two things maybe. These are two areas where WIPO is actually reaching out with its tentacles a little bit because they are very pertinent in terms of IP, and they had not been tackled so much by the organization so far. One is the area of trade secrets, and their relationships with the relationship with patents. And this is why we are actually organizing this May the second symposium on trade secrets and innovation. So I would encourage everyone to actually look it up on our webpage, the symposium in May on the 23rd and 24th. It's free of charge. You can register and listen to the conversations, but you can also come to Geneva and enjoy it live. So finally, we can have in-person meetings as well. So trade secrets is something that we are looking at more in detail now. Again, it's not only the patent law division, but the patent and technology law division. And trade secrets cannot really be separated from patent rights because they are having such a complicated but fascinating relationship. So that is one, and the other, which is of course standard essential patents, where WIPO is now in let's say in a reflection and exploratory phase in looking at what we could do to actually assist the various stakeholders in addressing some of the issues that are by nature global and cannot necessarily be addressed on a national or regional level. So if anyone out of the audience has any input that we should take into account, just reach out and we are happy to have a talk, because right now we are having very open ears to know what is needed in this respect. You also mentioned, the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. Our arbitration and mediation center is already doing a lot in terms of, friend determination, for example. But we would like to know more about different activities that WIPO could be engaging in facilitating this discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what we're starting to see the FRAND issues go to alternative dispute resolution, and or maybe better to say, we're not necessarily seeing it because it's all confidential, but we're
Yeah,
hearing, this that people are offering these services. Attorneys, if you go to their websites and you see that they're saying, "Oh, we handle these cases, and we have experience with arbitration and mediation of FRAND disputes," and so that is going on in the industry, and that's very interesting. That we're going to have to follow up on that as a I think a separate program, because that is over the last few years I think a relatively new development, because for a long time the FRAND issues were like, well, I'm not going to take a license, and and that sort of thing. So it seems like the world may be ready to actually sit down and license 5G and telecommunications and other standards in a way that
right.
wasn't true maybe a few years ago. But
Yeah.
that's a new program in itself. So it's good to hear that WIPO is pursuing that. But I'd like to give you one last opportunity. If you had the ability to make sure that people remembered one thing from this conversation, what is that one thing?
I think it is that WIPO is not an ivory tower of intellectual property, but WIPO is very much present in the discussions relating to intellectual property, and WIPO is working towards making it understandable and accessible to everyone. So it is not something that people on the street should not be concerned about. Of course, they don't have to get involved in WIPO activities necessarily, but it has to be understood that WIPO is indeed a huge repository of a huge amount of information, and that even small and medium-sized enterprises can access WIPO services and make use of all the services that WIPO can provide them. There are various programs now targeting youth, targeting SMEs, targeting very different stakeholder groups, and I think it's important that they know that WIPO is there to support them.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate you taking the time today. It's
Thank you
been a
for the
great
invitation.
conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Gene.